My name is Maria. I am 48 years old. I have 2 adult children, a husband, a house near St. Petersburg and a job in a regular school. I won't say that my life was bad. Just mundane. I walked as if on autopilot. She lived right, but without joy. I believed in God, but without fire. Every morning was similar to the previous one. The alarm clock, the coffee, the mirror, where the gaze increasingly lingered on the wrinkles. Iron, bus, work, smile to colleagues, calls to children. In the evening, a TV show, or a prayer, if suddenly the soul was sick. The one from my childhood, from my grandmother. Lord, have mercy. Lord, forgive. Sometimes I felt like a shadow was hanging over me. It's like my soul is waiting with bated breath for something. Something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. It was like a premonition stretched out over the years. And I waved it off. Who among us doesn't sometimes feel heavy inside? It happened on a Monday. The day was gray, drizzling, and featureless. I was returning home with groceries. I remember standing in the kitchen cutting bread. My hands were shaking as the pressure jumped again. Suddenly pain. She came abruptly. It was as if something had sunk into the back of my head and pulled everything out of me. I collapsed before I could think, is that all? But then there was nothing. It took me a moment to realize that I couldn't feel my body. I was lying there, but I didn't seem to be myself. The world became colorless. Just the hum. Not a sound, but a pulsing tinkle, like a huge bell being struck. The space around them became soft, as if blurred. Objects lost their clarity, and the walls disappeared. And then something began that I will never be able to forget. Everything went quiet. No fear. Only peace, but strange. Like a door that you opened without knowing what was behind it. It was as if I was standing on the border between worlds, on a thin crack of reality. And somewhere inside, I was called. Mute. Without words. But I knew someone was waiting for me. It wasn't a dream. Not a hallucination. It was a place. A space where the laws were different. There was no time. There was no gravity. There was a silence, an absolute, divine silence, from which the soul freezes. I couldn't move, but I didn't feel any weight or pain. Just waiting. At that moment, I thought. Am I dead? And then a shadow, light as a breath, passed by. Something ancient and endless stared back at me. I knew this was the beginning. I have a conversation waiting for me, but not with a human. The truth awaits me. I didn't fall. But it wasn't either. It was as if I was being pulled down and inside myself at the same time. Into a space that can't be measured. Spirit space. Where there is no matter, and everything happens simultaneously both before and after. At first I thought I was going crazy. A staircase appeared in front of me. Narrow, as if carved out of thin air. It wasn't made of wood, it wasn't made of stone, it was made of thought. She trembled at my gaze. Each step flickered, as if deciding whether to let me in or not. And I knew that if I went up, something great would be revealed. If I stumble, I'll disappear. I couldn't walk. I didn't have a body. But the movement was happening all the same. It came from the very core of my soul. I didn't get up, I was remembering. Every step up was a memory. And that's where the strangest part started. On the first step, I remembered the smell of my mother's perfume. Sheeper. Cold, tart. I'm a little girl, sitting on the floor, and my mother is doing her hair. The world seems huge. I don't think about God. I just love it. The second stage. I'm 10. At the church on Easter. Grandma whispers a prayer. The lamp under the icon is smoking. My hand is in hers. And at this point, everything is correct. I feel that God is near. Not as an idea. Like breathing. The third stage. I'm 17. I sit with my friends in a cafe, laughing, drinking coffee, smoking. There's a void inside, but I don't recognize it. I banish the thought of the soul as if it were out of place. But the little voice inside is still whispering. With each step, I remembered how I had forgotten. With small steps, I left without being noticed. Not because I wanted to. But because it was easier. At the 7th step, I stopped. There was an abyss ahead. Not darkness. Not the light. Simply, emptiness. Nothing. As an erased file. A space where there aren't even any questions. And that's where the stairs looked. I heard a voice. He didn't come from outside. It grew in me like a tree that suddenly bloomed in the middle of winter. Everything you've lost yourself. Not because I didn't know. But because I stopped remembering. The voice was not accusing. He was like a mirror that you couldn't stop looking at anymore. I tried to answer, but the words disappeared before they were born. I felt that whoever was talking to me knew everything. Not just my actions. But also something I didn't even let myself realize. Oblivion is not an accident, Maria. It's a choice. Little. Every day. You've learned not to hear me. And then I was sure I wasn't there. I was trembling. Even without a body, the soul can tremble. And then for the first time I realized, I wasn't a bad person. But I was drugged. My heart was asleep, and I didn't try to wake it. I lived as if everything was self-explanatory. As if you can put off forever for later. Hell doesn't start after death, Maria. It begins when a person ceases to remember who gave him the breath. And at that moment, the ladder disappeared. I was left hanging in the void. 1. With the truth. Without masks. When the ladder disappeared, I expected to fall. But there was no fall. Only a strange glide, as if not down, but deep. I was carried, not by time, not by wind, not by force. I was carried by my own thoughts. They surrounded me like mirrors. Hundreds, thousands of reflections, all of them mine. Every moment I turned away, when I chose silence instead of truth, comfort instead of conscience, comfortable lies instead of uncomfortable light. I looked at these scenes and it didn't seem so bad. I didn't kill, I didn't betray, I didn't bully. I just didn't notice. But there is no just in that world. Look, Maria. Here it is. The most ancient sin. Not murder. Not envy. Not pride. And this. And then he appeared in front of me. Not a demon. Not a monster. Man very ordinary. In a coat, with a phone in his hand. The face is blurry, as if no one has ever remembered it. He was sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee, looking at the screen. People were passing by. No one noticed. And he didn't see anyone either. Who's that? I asked. It's you. That's millions. This is the face of Oblivion. It is in everyone who has decided that truth is noise. Who replaced the great longing for God with an endless scrolling feed. I couldn't look away. There was no evil in that figure. But there was something worse, emptiness. He didn't do anything. That's why he was dangerous. And I suddenly remembered how dozens of times I had flipped through videos where people shared miracles. I switched it. Thinking, nothing new. Again, someone died, saw the light. Nonsense. I laughed at the fanatics. I called Vera naive. I lived without not because there was no God, but because I didn't want to see. And now I could see that it was all a solution. Oblivion is not a lack of knowledge. It's giving up thirst. With that, the figure disappeared. Instead, there are others. Thousands of faces. Men, women, young, old. All of them have blank eyes. They were all walking. Mute. Without a goal. We went to a place where there is no longer a question. I realized that I was seeing those who had left without a prayer. Without a thought. Without a last breath to him. They didn't shout. They didn't care. And that was hell. He wasn't a flame. He was an indifference perfected. You don't suffer, because you don't feel anything anymore. You're a shadow. And you chose it yourself. I screamed. Not with your voice, but with your soul. I didn't want to be one of them. I didn't want to disappear. And then I heard it again. The same voice, full of power and silence. It's still not too late. But the way back is through pain. Through the truth. Are you ready to see yourself, Maria? A real one. I was trembling. But she answered. Yes. I said yes, not knowing what I was agreeing to. I said yes, because in the world beyond death, lying is impossible. You can't pretend there. You can't think later. There you are what you are. When I accepted the truth, not in words, but in my heart, the world began to change. Or, more precisely, it began to open up. The space I was in began to burst into flames. But this fire was not of earth. It had no color, but it had substance. It didn't burn, but it penetrated to the core. He was alive. He saw me. I was in the middle of the flames, but I didn't feel any pain. Instead, something much scarier came along. I began to remember everything. Not in events. In terms of meaning. I remembered how easily I'd learned to keep quiet. As in a conversation with a friend, when she cried, I just nodded instead of talking about God. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she was afraid of being uncomfortable. I remembered how I once felt a strong urge to pray, at night, for no reason, but instead went to wash the dishes. And the moment I turned away, someone was waiting. And I didn't come. I remembered how my voice had died inside me. The one who called me to look. And I saw the image. A huge field covered in ash. And under it, the roots. Alive, throbbing. The fire was not for punishment. It was for an autopsy. It passed through my soul like a surgical light, revealing everything I held deep, even from myself. The voice was speaking, but now it sounded like an echo in my own thoughts. This is honesty. The first door to light. Through it, you will know me. But first, you must see yourself. Not through the eyes of the body. And through the eyes of eternity. I suddenly realized that. We have been afraid of hell all our lives, not realizing that it begins in us. It doesn't come from outside. It is a growing void that we feed with compromises, excuses, and fuss. I saw that I had done no harm. But I stopped choosing the good. And without a choice, the soul does not live. Another scene appeared in the flames. A little girl. Standing by the window. In her hand is a cross. She doesn't understand the words of prayer, but she knows, there is a God. I saw her grow up, and every year her hands less often hold the cross, more often, the phone. Her voice becomes more confident, but quieter for the sky. And I knew it was me. I started to cry. Not from guilt. From loss. The fire intensified. But now he was no longer a source of fear. He was a mercy that exposed wounds not for pain, but for healing. And then the light came. He didn't appear suddenly. It didn't flash. It was always there. I just couldn't see him before. Because it was closed. The light had no shape. But there was a question coming from him. It was the quietest sound in the world, but it was the loudest I could hear. What did you love, Maria? Really? This question burned through me. Because love is not a feeling. This is the soul's choice. And I chose convenience. Peace of mind. Status. I didn't love God. I was just afraid of losing him. And then the light began to come closer. Not as a figure. But as a presence. It filled me from the inside out. And the closer it got, the more clearly the other became. My soul is empty. I created a home, a family, rules, consolations. But all these are walls. And inside is the room where he was supposed to live. Empty. And I realized. This fire, this light, this question is not someone else. This is him. Jesus Christ. Not in the image, not in the figure. But in essence. He didn't come to me, he just showed me where I didn't come to him. I fell. Or, more precisely, she gave herself up. No excuses. Without, I tried. Without, I didn't have time. Just as I am. And then, for the first time in all those strange hours, I felt his grace. I lay there without a body, without thoughts, without the right to illusion. Like a naked soul, erased to the truth. But that was the miracle. Because when everything that you built yourself disappears, only what was given to you remains. And I suddenly realized that mercy is not a reward. This is the breath that comes when you recognize that you are no longer breathing. He didn't say anything. But I knew he was here. Jesus Christ. Not the one I imagined when I looked at the icons. Not a teacher in white, not a judge on a throne. It is a living fire that has no beginning. He was the soul of love, and I could feel my own soul beginning to tremble in his presence, like a bell just touching the sound. I couldn't look at him, not because I was scared, but because it was too bright. My essence was like ashes next to him. And there was no humiliation in it. There was only the truth. Then I heard his voice. It was inside, but not mine. It was like silence becoming a word. I gave you breath. I've been waiting for you every day. But you lived like I was an accident. You didn't blaspheme me. You just forgot. And this is the most ancient sin. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to hear it. But truth does not wait for agreement. It's just there. People are afraid of hell. But hell is not a punishment. He is the consequence. He is the emptiness that the heart turns into when it ceases to crave me. You didn't live for evil. But not for the light either. You chose nothing. And millions choose to do so. Every day. Jesus did not rebuke. He was showing me. I saw how every harmless act in life was a tiny path to darkness. Not because I did evil. It was because I refused to choose what was good, the real thing. It was then that I realized what it meant to be warm. Not hot. Not cold. And neutral. And it was just such as I that he called in the scriptures, I will spew out of my mouth. The words suddenly became flesh. I felt what it was like to be forgotten. Not because God is leaving. It's because you've been leaving all your life. And suddenly, the darkness around them began to shake. I saw again those who were in the void before. Thousands. Millions of faces. They didn't curse. They were silent. Because they weren't used to talking to him. And I realized that these are not just dead. These are the ones who have become indifference. They were not convicted. They chose to be far away from the light. But now, in this place, on this edge, where there was still an opportunity, I was given mercy. Jesus didn't make me choose. He just pointed, "Here you are. And here I am. Which of us is more important to you?" I started to cry. Not like in real life, with pain and emotion. It's like a soul that has finally woken up. I remembered everything that had been forgotten. That first love for God. That thrill. That childish thirst to know, to understand, to serve. None of this is dead. It was a dormant seed, buried deep beneath a layer of habit, fear, and vanity. And now it has risen. Jesus came closer. And I felt more than just love. I sensed that he was hungry for me. And there was something unbearably great about it. God was waiting for me. My dusty, drained soul. My tired heart. My forgotten faith. He waited. Patiently. Relentlessly. Not as a judge. And as a father. And then he said, "Your death isn't over yet. You're standing at the border. But before I allow you to return, you must see what awaits those who choose oblivion to the end." And in that moment, I knew. I was going to see what I didn't want to know. But it should. Because if I don't see hell, I won't understand why heaven is needed. The light began to fade. Not because he was gone. But because I had to step into the darkness. I could feel the air changing around me. It becomes denser and more viscous. It was as if reality itself was shrinking, contracting, becoming something still. And then silence. Not simple, not peaceful. It's an ancient one, an abyss without an echo. The kind of silence that doesn't wait for an answer, because everyone stopped asking long ago. "This is a place," said the voice, "where prayers are no longer heard. Not because they can't be heard. But because no one says them." I descended into the land where prayers are silent. Landscapes without time unfolded before me. A city without lights. But not destroyed, it was preserved. No moaning, no ashes. Only buildings, houses, streets, and people. They walked, worked, talked, bought, watched. But it was all in a dream. I suddenly realized that these weren't scenes from hell. It is a reflection of the world of the living. This place is not after death. It already exists in souls who have forgotten God in their lifetime. I saw a woman walking down the sidewalk. In the ear, headphones, in the eyes, fatigue. She walks past the church without looking up. In the hands, coffee, in the heart, emptiness. I saw a man sitting in front of a screen scrolling through the news. He knows everything but the main thing. He is aware, but not awake. I've seen young people laughing at a party, tired parents swapping love for control, a pastor who talks more about morality than salvation. They are all alive in body, but dead in soul. And it was here, in this strange mirror, that it was visible. Why am I seeing this? I whispered. The voice of Jesus did not come from outside, but from inside my pain. Because hell doesn't start where life ends. And where the soul stops searching. You thought hell was a punishment. But hell is a choice. This is a world without me, which a person builds himself. It's not in the future. He's already angry. I looked again. And I saw their faces. No makeup, no emotions. They looked like masks. Their lips could smile. But his eyes were locked. Suddenly I heard, as if through glass, a single prayer. A faint voice, almost a whisper. "My God, if you exist." And at that moment, the sky trembled slightly. And I realized that even one prayer, even one spark, can break this darkness. But it must be real. Unspoken for peace. And torn from the inside, like the cry of a drowning man. I started to cry. Because I knew I was one of them. Not angry. Not vicious. Just sleeping. Jesus said. I stand at the door and knock. But a person has learned to live so that he does not hear a knock. He drowned it out with business, haste, and philosophy. And when death comes, he is surprised to be left alone. But I was there, always. I saw it differently now. This land of silence was the threshold of ultimate darkness. This is not hell, but the road to it. And there were millions following it. No shouting. Without fear. Without God. And I suddenly realized that this place is the biggest tragedy. Because it doesn't scare you. It seems normal. It is our familiar world. Without prayers. Without sanctity. No pain. Without meaning. I turned around. And the last unspoken question rang through me. Why are you still calling out to us when we haven't heard it so many times? And then Jesus answered, with a sadness that cannot be described. Because love never stops. Even if they don't notice it. She doesn't leave. It stays. Until the end. And I realized that. We weren't alive because we deserved to be. But because he's still waiting. I was standing on the edge. Not earth, not hell, not heaven. But the boundary between maybe and no longer. Jesus did not speak. He waited. Because now I had the floor. I felt that one decision. Not in thought, not in emotion. But in spirit. Would change everything. But first, the last door. He pointed ahead, and I saw not a gate, not a tunnel of light. I saw a man. It was huge, ancient, and quiet. His face was covered with what looked like ashes, but not from the fire, from time. He stood motionless. As if the whole point of his existence was to be still. It was as if space itself had given him the right to guard that line. Who's that? I asked, not in my voice, but in my soul. This is the guardian. It guards the threshold between time and eternity. It asks only one question. But you must answer, not with words. And its nature. I moved closer. And the guardian looked at me. His gaze was like 1,000 years of solitude. He saw my beginning, my path, my secret self. He didn't judge. He expected the truth. And then he asked. What did you bring with you? I froze. Everything that seemed important was gone. Diplomas, projects, memories, wounds, victories. Everything was discolored under this question. What did I bring with me? I looked back at my life. For years that seemed full. But now dust. I didn't bring any cases. I didn't bring any feats. But deep down, something was shaking. Not a memory. Not a credit. And thirst. And in that moment, I realized that the most important thing I brought was a hunger for him. Which, despite everything, never faded. Not permanent, not perfect. But alive. It wasn't love in its mature form. But genuine suffering without him. Even if I didn't always understand what I was missing. The guard nodded. Not as an endorsement. And as a confession, it's enough to pass. But before he disappeared, he said. Many people come here with their hands full. But their souls are empty. You came empty-handed. But your soul is trembling, so you are still alive. So you'll hear the last one. And then he spoke again. Jesus Christ. Not as a teacher. Not as a judge. It's like a brother standing between me and eternity. Listen carefully. This is something that is not heard on earth. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to. And then there was a silence so thick that it seemed as if all things had stopped to hear. And in that silence he said, "The worst sin is not murder, not adultery, not lying. These are all consequences. The most terrible sin is when the soul ceases to strive for me. When a person chooses to live without me, not out of spite, but out of indifference." And then I saw. It is this sin that destroys millions. He doesn't look evil. It looks like normality. When you say, "I'll pray later," it doesn't matter. The main thing is to be a good person. And all this is care. Not an escape. Not a riot. And the distance. Millions of souls, he said. Don't choose hell. They just don't choose me. And this is the terrible virtue of hell. He doesn't demand your love. He's just waiting for you to stop loving the light. I stood there, barely breathing. It wasn't pain. Not terrible. It was the holy clarity that destroyed all falsehoods. And then Jesus said, "You can go back. But remember, you won't be the same again. Because now you know. Hell is a place where God no longer calls." And I whispered, "I want to go home. But now, home is you." When you have already seen eternity, time becomes fragile. I felt my soul begin to separate from that timeless silence. As if I were being gently pulled back into the fabric of life. Into my body, into the pain, into the struggle. But before he left, Jesus touched me. Not by hand. But by word. "You've seen what it's like to live without me. Now show others how to live with me." And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just allowed to go back. I've been given a task. I opened my eyes. Pain. My heart is pounding. Someone is shouting. Light above your head. Hospital lamps. Doctors. Life. I came back. And in that same second, I realized that I wasn't the same person as before. I couldn't forget the faces in the land of silence. I couldn't forget the look in Jesus' eyes, filled with pain for those who couldn't hear anymore. And I couldn't forget the silence that rings with the absence of prayer. Now I wasn't just living after clinical death. I lived after meeting the truth. Everything has changed since then. I listen to people not with my ears, but with my heart. I just need some peace of mind. But between the lines, it was. I haven't spoken to God in a long time. I could see the emptiness in her eyes. Recognizing her as the land where prayers are silent. The one that starts not in hell, but in the kitchen, in the office, in social networks, in the mirror. So I started talking. Not as a prophet, but as a person who was already on the other side of oblivion. I'm telling you now because I know. You can live in the lights of a big city. But your soul can slowly fade away and you won't notice. Before it's too late. But if you still feel anxious. If you sometimes feel that you are too far away from Him. If you remember how you once loved God. And want to go back. Then you are still alive. And you can start right now. Stop. Turn off the noise. And just say, "My God, I do not know where you are. But if you still call, I want to hear it." This phrase is enough to make the light flicker again. If you watch to the end, it's not an accident. Maybe God is already knocking on your heart. You just learned to live without hearing. But now you know. And you're not alone. If you are close to this story, if it touched your heart, Subscribe to this page. Not for the sake of algorithms. And for the sake of those who are still asleep. So we can wake them up together. One vote can light the road back home. Welcome to Timeless Religious Stories. Where every story is a reminder that eternity is closer than it seems.